Ivy Ngeow was born and raised in Johor Bahru, Malaysia. She holds an MA in writing from Middlesex University, where she won the 2005 Middlesex University Literary Press Prize and was 1,500 entrants worldwide. Her debut, The Cry of the Flying Rhino, from 2017, was awarded the International Perverse Prize in Hong Kong. And her novels include Overboard from 2020 and Heart of Glass 2018. And now this wonderful anthology, which I'm thoroughly enjoying reading, and I'm sure that you all will. So I'll hand over to Ivy.
Thank you. Good evening to all of you, and thanks very much for making it out after the blight of 2020 and 2021. Asia, 4 letters, 3 billion people. Asian Anthology New Writing Volume 1 is a unique, first-of-its-kind project whose objective is to give new voices from all over the world a chance, as well as more established and prize-winning writers. It has always been my dream to read more of the kind of books that I was raised with, international voices with great storytelling on multiple themes. Apart from the requirement for the writing to be set in Asia, writers of any nationality or gender were eligible to submit for this publication, in keeping with Leopard Print's inclusion and diversity policy. The contributors in this book have come from Malaysia, Singapore, India, Myanmar, Hong Kong, Serbia, Austria, France, the UK, and the United States of America. As someone who grew up seeking and devouring Asian stories, I consider myself fortunate to be involved in this exciting project. It is in our collective interest as readers and writers to hear more diverse voices. It takes a village to raise a book, and I hope you enjoy the stories. So our first reader for tonight will be Cheung Louie, who will be Riding the Killer Fish, Laksa Uncle, and Winter Solstice. It will be followed by Yvonne's reading, which will consist of her own story, Day of Silence, A Father, Son, and Banu. And Lauren, who is V.S. Lai's niece, will read Mee Mamak, Spring Onions, and Sparkle of Fireflies. And I will conclude tonight's readings. So I hope you will stay with us and enjoy the stories. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Cheung Louie, and I will first be reading from Winter Solstice. Mr. Lau nonchalantly switched on the TV and moved on some rice. A familiar news jingle came on. Gowning braced himself. Brainwashing crap, he thought. Welcome to News at 6:30, a female voice said. A rally was held in Edinburgh Square in Central, during which a protester took down a nearby national flag. Gowning, come, eat while it's hot. Mrs. Lau dropped off a glistening piece of salt-baked drumstick in his bowl. This chicken I got from Sister Lang's, 85 Hong Kong dollars a kg. Not bad. I thought all wet markets would raise prices today. The TV screen was a flurry of banners, batons, pepper sprays, cameras, shoving, shouting, and pointed gun. Mr. Lau grunted. Mrs. Lau shot him a look. The newsreader, in the same matter-of-fact tone, went on. Financial Secretary Paul Chan said illegal acts like destroying shops not only harm law and order, but also smash the rice bowls of working folks. Mr. Lau grunted again, louder this time. Mrs. Lau laid down a piece of pak choy cabbage on her mound of rice. Let's watch something else. It's not every day we have a festive family dinner, she said, reaching for the remote. For a while they ate in silence, save for a voice on TV, now on another channel, excitedly announcing one supermarket deal after another against a merry jingle. Suddenly, through the windows came the distant wails of police sirens. Gao-ming's instinct was to bolt upright, but he kept his head down and strained his ears as he stared at the hymn of shrimp shells on the newspaper. He discerned which direction the van was heading and guessed from which police station it had set off. He made a mental note of the time, 1838. "Elman Rocker, $99 for two, only $99 for two," gushed the voice on TV. "That's a good deal," said Mrs. Liao. "Relax," Gao-ming told himself. "It's all right. Other scouts have this covered." "What's the use of so much candy?" asked Mr. Liao. "What's the use? We can buy it early for Chinese New Year," Mrs. Liao replied. Gao-ming was vaguely startled. Chinese New Year? For weeks, if not months, he'd been living day by day, not knowing what tomorrow would bring or whether there was a tomorrow at all, as the situation spiraled from bad to worse to even worse. There were moments he feared he would not live to see 2020. Yet here was his mother, merrily planning candy for relatives' visit next February, as though everything would be fine. If only everything would be fine. Next, I will read from Laksa Uncle by Jenny Hall. Another Saturday came. In the living room, I had my notes and the stainless steel container ready. I just needed the clear signal. The whole scene looked like a screenshot from a Cantonese movie crime investigation show. The poor man had blood gushing out of his head, and his limbs were bruised a nasty shade of black and blue. The cart had flipped over, causing the broth and ingredients to spatter across the street. Police had barricaded the area with the long "do not cross" tapes, while the victim was carried into the white ambulance. "Aye, all those are long," an auntie murmured. "So ridiculous." "Blame the son," another cried. "Nothing to do after meals, borrow money from those are long. I'm sure the so high son will get his karma one day." It was no secret that Laksa Uncle's unemployed only son had a huge reputation as a gambler. People had seen him in 4D lottery shops in Genting's casino. While the son was worrying about the winning numbers of the day, his father was selling laksa in the hot weather. "What are you doing here?" Marc somehow found me among the crowd. Grabbing my hand, she dragged me back into the house. "But Laksa Uncle..." Next I'll read from Riding the Killerfish by Sylvia, which features a leprechaun cat in a kimono. And after my a Cantonese and a Malaysian accent, I will spare you the agony of my pretending to have an Irish accent. But belated Happy St. Patrick's Day, and yeah. He was doing it again. Sorry. "It was just a trash. I couldn't resist," he said. "Full of rainbow colors, plum apricots, raspberries ripe with juice, crisp green apple slices, smelling strawberries crowned with fresh and tender leaves of mint. I just wanted to bounce about in it." "Well, we'd better rinse your kimono and hang it up to dry. You too, by the looks of it." I pointed to curtain rod and swept the sunny cotton fabric to one side. "Go and sit up there, out of the way while I clean this up," I said, and hung the dripping kimono twice the size of the breadth of my hand over the kitchen doorknob. Ben took a deep breath and leapt up to the curtain rod, making it in one go and clinging with hands and feet. Proud, he balanced, hanging by the knees, his eyes half closed and his shiny sheeped barley hair dipping down like silk. "Irish love," he said, swinging to a stop. He closed his eyes and pretended to be asleep. I stared at him. He hadn't changed. "We eat raw fish, you know," he said, and flicked back onto the kitchen counter. "Who's we? And when was that?" I asked, and knew I'd been baited again. "In Japan, down by the village with Auntie-san. Chopsticks aren't easy. They're not rounded in Japan and things slip off if you're not careful. Sushi's fine though, you can just spear it. Ever tried?" I've never eaten raw fish before coming to live in Japan. Not that I wouldn't have dared, but where would I get raw fish in the the middle of the countryside. Anyway, I'd never even been to a Japanese restaurant back then, although there were a couple in Geneva. You know, they even have bars there now, where legit boats carrying all sorts of fish delicacies and morsels float past before your table to tease your fancy. I could take you to one, he said, leaving questions in the air. Thank you.
First of all, I'd just like to thank Ivy for all her hard work in getting this anthology together. It's a fantastic achievement, and thank you for selecting me. My story, Day of Silence, is set on Bali, where a young British couple are challenged to think differently about their future together. Ava leant against the high wall enclosing their villa and looked down at the hard-packed earthen road. She caught a mix of smells, exhaust fumes and oleander from the garden just out of sight. The little street was quiet enough, though the metallic hum and thrum of traffic noise could be heard in the distance. John was on the alert and nudged his fiancée when a car nosed its way around the corner. "This is it then," he said. "No going back. I reckon it'll take about 20 to 30 minutes to drive to Denpasar." The driver, Bayan, leapt out of his seat and welcomed them like old friends, though it was only their third day on Bali. They both liked his open face and smart appearance. Yesterday's successful trip, to see the area's most famous temples and restaurants recommended in Lonely Planet, meant he was booked for the rest of the holiday. "Can you drive us to the capital, Wayan?" John asked. "We've got an appointment with the wedding planner," and he read out the address. The second story is from A Father's Son by Sandeep Kumar Mishra, where a man returns home for his father's funeral and is confronted by memories of his childhood. The mourners were not plentiful on the day of the funeral. Charvik Sharma had not been a popular man in this life, having dedicated very little time to cultivating and maintaining relationships. Sahil, his eldest, watched the people move about in respectful silence, occasionally stopping with one of his siblings or mother to offer quiet condolences, while the chanters continued through their mantras. Some made their way over to him, but he had nothing to say to them in return. Everything was too fresh. Sahil wasn't sure how he felt about his father's death yet. He hadn't even seen his father for at least 10 years, having left to live with his aunt while he was still a boy. He looked over at his mother, his brother Ishen, and his sister Shalina. His mother looked sad at least, but Ishen and Shalina looked as numb as he. He wondered what the past 10 years had been like for them, and if their father had changed at all since failing Sahil. He would never forget the first time his father struck him. It was a miserable, humid day, the air so wet that you could almost taste it. Charvik was home, classes having been let out, and was especially short of temper. Sahil, still a small child at the time, refused to go outside to play. "It's too hot," he remembered protesting. "I'll melt." His mother had gently but firmly encouraged him to go outside anyway. "You won't melt, I promise, but you really should go outside. The sun is good for you." "I don't want to," his little voice rose. "Sahil, my darling, please go outside." His mother looked around, fear colouring her face. It was the first time Sahil could recall seeing his mother afraid, though it would not be the last. Charvik appeared around the corner, his face an oncoming storm, and Sahil understood his mother's fear. The last extract is from Marc de Friti's Banu. Set on a semi-mythical island of Malaysia, It is a powerful tale of corruption and despoiling of the natural habitat. Banu watched the logging camp from the forest's edge. In the shadows of the giant trees, she was almost invisible. Cicadas screeched their whining song. The men were washing and cooking after their day's work, the air filled with the wood smoke that rose from a small cooking fire. Most of the men were shirtless, thin but muscular, visibly tired. Banu could hear their voices, but could not make out their words. A langur they had shot was skewered on a stick and roasting over the embers. To Banu, the peeled, unmoving body looked just like a human baby and made her hate the men even more. But she took some consolation that they would be plagued that night by monkey fleas. Eat and be eaten. Banu knew all about fleas, how their bites were more painful and itched for longer than mosquito bites. This wasn't the first time she had come here to watch the loggers. When they were away during the day, she walked through their shelter and rifled through their things. But beyond the thin, sweat-stained foam mattresses and a few clothes and bars of soap, they didn't seem to own much. She should have been at school, but being here was better than enduring the beatings the teacher gave her and her classmates. Sometimes he made them hold their ears and squat as punishment for unknown transgressions. Other days he made them stand out in the hot sun without anything to drink, showing that he had power over them and could do whatever he wanted and get away with it. Thank you.
Thank you for interesting me with your stories. I'll be starting with Mee Mamak by V.S. Lai, which is a short story about, set in a mamak store in Malaysia. Clang! A metal plate clattered onto the greasy floor. Misshapen lumps in a murky yellow liquid oozed out from under the overturned metal plate, its contents unrecognizable from the original construct of the best dal and roti canai served on Jalan Tong. It was not easy for the mamak restaurant to lay claim to this honor. The fact that it was the only restaurant on Jalan Tong and the only one serving mamak food were not the reasons, no. Its crowd-pleasing Mee Mamak was another gem on its oily laminated menus. That night, all of the 44-seater purpose-built tables that were bolted to the floor of the restaurant were filled with the buttocks of diners. Buttocks of all shapes and sizes, some covering the round chairs perfectly, some registering not even a meter, whilst others spilled over the sides barely contained by the straining cloth that encapsulated their flesh. Buttocks also perched on rickety plastic chairs at tables disgorged onto the 5-foot way outside the restaurant and onto the surrounding roadside. The owners of these buttocks were the most disparate bunch of people anyone could expect to descend upon Jalan Tong, from the richly adorned to the simply clad, topmost and lowest specimen of present-day society. However, their external experiences did not guarantee that their internal qualities were of equal measure. Under the unflinching brightness of the fluorescent lighting, or in twilight darkness for those seated outside, all the owners of these buttocks had one unifying purpose: to fill their stomachs with enriching sustenance and their souls with comfort and fleeting assurance that for just a microsecond, they were part of a greater collective worshipping at the feet of the mamak gods. They were not simply mere drops of grease clinging onto the clammy floor of the universe, only to be washed out in the final cleansing when the lights had been switched off and the shutters closed. But enough of the background fillers, let's bring our attention back to the main event of the falling plate. The metallic clang of the plate landing on the floor sliced through the chatter of the buttocks. Sorry, diners, not buttocks. Let's repeat that again. The metallic clang sliced through the chatter of the diners that sounded like countless out-of-tune radio channels playing all at once. Silence blanketed over the entire restaurant. All heads turned towards the table located in the far corner, including the waiters in their neat little caps. Next, I will be reading Spring Onions by Ming, involving the story of Ming, her mom, and their steam bun shop based in Singapore. That Saturday, Ning had accompanied her mother to Tien Hock Keng for prayers. Ning was a month away from an examination that had the potential to define her future. After learning about her daughter's dismal mid-year test results, Ning's mother had found it hard to sleep. Ning's older brother, Ren, on the other hand, had fared much better in his academic studies. A student highly regarded by his peers, Ning's mother did not need to worry about her son. Ning had never wanted to be part of this prayer nonsense, but at her mother's insistence, she dragged her feet to the temple. She considered it a waste of time. She would rather film a series of live hack videos for TikTok than stand idly at the temple. Ma, why do you offer spring rolls to the Confucius? Ning asked. Instead of fruit, Ning's mother had prepared a plate of spring onions and steamed buns as offerings to the Confucius statue. Outside, heavy rain fell on the ground like water gushing through a drain. Ning cast a glance at the temple's rooftop, its curved ridges and elongated eaves with upturned swallowtail decoration blocking the gray skies. Fat raindrops began to whip Ning's legs, causing her to retreat further into the temple statue shelter. Ning's mother had followed her usual practice of waiting for 15 minutes for the gods to eat the offerings before clearing them away. Ning wondered if they liked spring onions. She certainly did not. Spring onion is tong in Mandarin. Tong. It means intelligence. You will need it for your exams, Ning's mother replied, folding her arms across her chest. The smell of the incense coal burning in the main hall spread through the air. Ning was surprised to find the smell soothing, and she likened it to sandalwood incense sticks from her favorite aromatherapy shop. My friends say praying to Confucius will help you in your exams, Ning's mother said as she rummaged in her bag for her phone. She fished it out and began to tap away. Ning wanted very much to tell her mother that she was going to fail her upcoming examinations, and no amount of prayers or offerings to any deities would work, but she couldn't summon the courage. And finally, I'll be reading A Sparkle of Fireflies, written by Krinberg, set mainly in Tokyo, but also in Kyoto and Kamakura, Japan. Closer to Kamakura, it started to snow. Swirling flurries that turned into slower, heftier flakes that stuck to the windscreen and then flew off. There was a backup of traffic in the city, and they tried in vain to avoid the ongoing annual festival that Iwao remembered was for good luck in commerce, and of course, renewal. Hotaru insisted on visiting the Daibutsu at Kotokuin Shrine. There was urgency on her part to see it. After many starts and stops, while weaving through the throngs of festival attendees, they parked close to the entrance of the place. The peaceful bronze giant sat in a lotus position. Walking in the falling snow, they entered the almost empty area where Amitabha sat in infinite serenity. After Hotaru purchased the tickets, a small bunch of chopsticks, and her paper omikuju fortune, Iwao followed her, pulling his gray overcoat tighter. He stared at the fierce Neo statue. Hotaru went ahead alone up the steps to the giant urns of burning incense and joss. Placing her palms together, she recited a silent prayer, a plea for strength. She saw Iwao off to the side. Hotaru lit 3 sticks, the creation, heaven, and earth. Hotaru had moved to tie up her omikuju fortune as she read next to hundreds hanging silently in the snowy air. It bode well for her in the upcoming year, and feeling better, she turned her head so Iwao couldn't see, and caught a snowflake on her outstretched tongue. Smiling at the silly and spontaneous act, she was satisfied. They looked up into the slow-motion cascade of crystals, and their eyes met. I know something happened inside you during your preceding journey, but that's over. He raised his gray eyebrows. Thank you.
So your final reader is me. The first story I'm going to read is The Brooches by Krishnaveni Panikker, which is told from the viewpoints of an Indonesian maid and the wealthy man who had employed her. Tanti. The Indonesian maid was waiting for Datin to join the rest of the family for breakfast. They ate and discussed family matters as usual. Everyone was at the table except Datin, and she was never late for breakfast, or any other function for the matter. Tanti had been working for the wealthy Dato Johari's family the past 3 years. His wife, Datin Jasmine, was wheelchair-bound. Tanti had to keep an eye on her hyperactive boss, who also had epilepsy. Datin ran a few boutiques which sold expensive baju kabayas and batik sarongs. Rumor had it that Datin was much richer and older than her younger, handsome husband. They had 3 children, the eldest a son named Imran, and 2 daughters, Aimi and Mimi. Tanti decided to check on Datin's whereabouts. As she knocked and opened Datin's bedroom door, she heard water splashing out of the faucet. Tanti rushed into the attached bathroom, which was ajar, and was numb with shock. She found Datin's wheelchair nearby the bathtub, and Datin face down in the bathtub, which was full of water. Tanti assumed that Datin must have had an attack of fits while she was brushing her teeth, as there was a toothbrush floating in the bathtub. The tube of an uncapped toothpaste was still at the sink with her facial cleanser. Datin was never allowed to be alone in the bathroom in the mornings. She was always accompanied by either her husband or one of her daughters, but unfortunately that morning the entire family was busy preparing for the opening of a new boutique. Datin! Datin! Datin was never allowed to be alone. The maid's screams brought the family to her room. Dato Johari's knuckles were white as he held onto his wife's wheelchair. Shark's Best Friend by Rumaizah Bakar. Endless layers of pointed white teeth raced towards him. A big grey tail flipped over his head. Salty water filled his throat. He lost his footing and coughed hysterically. Danny. Danny sat in his office in the dark. He ran his palm over his damp ponytail. His neck and shirt were drenched in sweat. His secretary had switched off the air conditioning when she left hours ago, but he did not have the energy to get up. He stared at the 2 framed photos on the wall. Visitors loved to see the first image of him lying down at the Sikadan beach with a baby shark. Its caption was heartwarming, "My best friend." The second piece was a photo of the villager's boat that he used for his field work. His Islander research assistant had proudly raised it in the sand as a monument in his honor. A tribute was printed on the body of the boat. Dato Daniel, Dr. Ong, Shark's hero. He would undertake the presidential post for Shark Lovers Asia Pacific, and in due time earn big bucks and international fame. He had already eyed a few potential residential areas by the beach in New South Wales, Australia. His children would continue their secondary education at an international school. His wife would enjoy a socialite life with the other expatriates' spouses. And lastly, I'm going to be reading from my own story, The Dog Walker. This story is told from the viewpoint of a man and his dog and is inspired by my love for dogs. He took a long, hard look, and then he said, "Okay." David So had never had a dog before, but then he'd never lost his job before. There was a first for everything. His 22-year-old niece Stephanie, who had never worked a day in her life, now fancied a change. She was going to America to check out a film studies course. It was all right for some people. She'd offered to pay him 200 ringgit a day, expenses on top. David was not in a position to say no. All he had to do was to keep the dog company, take him for walks, feed him. Seemed like the easiest job. He thought back when he was in PR a year ago, managing a tech firm's marketing and web strategy. He hadn't found anything else since. Soon he would be handling a dog. Now that was a different animal. having to bite down on his pride. Whenever he dropped by at his brother's, did not make it easier. His brother and sister-in-law ran different businesses, morning till night. He never saw them. You wouldn't know they lived here. He looked around him as the dark granite patio with a hammered finish, where the dog had been padding around since living here. The dog's house alone was a palace, a mini sandstone temple with built-in Italian spray taps for washing the stainless steel water and food bowls. There was no denying that his brother had done well for himself. A 5,000 square foot designer house with swimming pool and electronic gates in Mont Chiara, with far-reaching views of Klang Valley, a new black Range Rover, his brother's spare family vehicle, and a couple of less rugged vehicles, such as a tiny sports Mercedes, which was Stephanie's, and a Prius, the wife's shopping trolley. His name is Keen, said Stephanie. She wanted a personal maid just for herself, and she got 2, a big dog, and she got 1, and now she decided she'd die for a film studies course in San Francisco, and that too was in the bag. Pardon? Said David, distracted when he looked straight into the dog's soul, if there was such a thing, and the dog stared back. Keen! Keen was like a long-lost friend found again. The dog's eyes had the sad, downturned look of an ancient lion. Yet he was not old. He was only 4. In human terms, he would be a young, fit, hot-blooded man. David chuckled at the thought, the opposite of him. Thank you very much. I'm afraid the evening has come to an end now, and we've run out of time. So I'd just like to say my quick thank yous. I'd like to thank St Barnabas and Ian for bringing people together. Firstly, as a COVID-19 vaccination center, and then through the local community events like these. I'd like to thank my family and my friends, Tina and Mary, for being Team Ivy tonight and always. And lastly, to you all for coming, for listening and supporting this local London event. Without you, there'd be no reason for us to write. Before you go, there's books and tour merch available, and the authors will sign them if you want them signed. If not, that's fine. And the books are 20% off retail price because we are undercutting a major online retailer just tonight. And if you didn't get to speak to us, please speak to us now. We'll be around to do signings and to do the book sales. And if that's not enough, please do join us at the Pig and Whistle opposite Mountain Road, where you can talk to us more if you want to, totally optional. So come and say goodbye before you leave, and it was a real pleasure to meet you all here. Good night.